Yo, what's going on, everyone? I hope you are all having a spooktacular October. Last week, I released the top 6 NES horror games, which you can view from the link below. And as I promised in that video, here is the top 6 Famicom horror games. Now, I did not begin playing Famicom games until much later in life, so I do not have a ton of experience or nostalgia for these titles. But I have dived deep into the horror catalog, and I have to say, I am impressed. And also kinda pissed I never got these as a kid. There are a solid number of horror titles, but you know how I roll. I like to pare it down to the top 6, and they're in no particular order. So sit back, grab some candy, hit that like and subscribe button, and enjoy. The primary reason for this video existing is also the most obvious choice on this list. Sweet Home. Released in 1989 by Capcom, this game has a storied history that starts with the film of the same name, directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. The story revolves around a TV crew who wants to explore the abandoned Maima mansion, which contains rare frescoes, so that they can be restored and shared with the world. The only problem is that there's a curse on the mansion, and soon the crew is fighting just to stay alive. The game is an adaptation of this film, as you control the party of 5, who each have their own special tools. Of course, there were some liberties taken against the film, but there are some key moments that are almost identical. Now, you will come across a ton of different supernatural enemies as you search for the hidden frescoes. Inventory management is the key to surviving in this game. You will need to be smart as you level up your characters and try to avoid pitfalls, as permadeath is another unique feature to this gameplay. The game is very impressive and can take up to 8 hours to complete, which may make this the longest horror game of the 8-bit era. Sweet Home was also a direct inspiration for Resident Evil, between the mansion in the woods, the limited inventory, and of course the use of opening doors as a loading screen. This was the first JRPG from Capcom, and although I'm generally not a fan of this genre, this is an easy game to get caught up in, and it deserves a ton of respect for the groundwork it laid in the survival horror genre. Next up, we have Kid Dracula, developed by Konami and released in 1990. This game is a chibi-style Castlevania clone, with the players taking control of the titular character, Kid Dracula. His goal is to destroy the demon Galamoth, and as you make your way through the levels, you're going to be confronted by plenty of familiar monsters. Not only does this feel like Castlevania, but you can also receive power-ups once you defeat bosses. So it's almost as if Mega Man and Castlevania had a baby and put fangs on it. The game just screams Halloween, and it's just a fun little platformer. The control in the game is very tight, and the graphics are well done, if not a little too cute for my personal taste. Kid Dracula is a fun and short game that is tough not to smile through, so try it out. Speaking of Castlevania clones, this next game is wild. Holy Diver, released in 1989 by IREM, is a loving nod to metal music. Between the obvious name grab from the popular Dio song, you can also see links to Black Sabbath, Slayer, and King Crimson. The graphics are on par with Castlevania 1, and the soundtrack is really well done. Playing as Randy, you will need to use various magic spells to defeat enemies across 6 stages. I have to say, this is one of the few games that really required you to use all of your powers. And I absolutely love the freeze power. It's such a cool idea being able to freeze not only enemies on screen, but freezing lava. I know it's been done in other games, but this one just does it really well. But I do have to warn you, if you're gonna try this one, it's motherfuckingly difficult. It makes Castlevania look easy. The knockback is the biggest issue. I think this has to be the worst game for this. I can't tell you how many times I died just because I was knocked off a ledge. So go blast your favorite heavy metal music, grab a beer, and try this one out. The next and final Castlevania-ish game is Getsu Fuumaden. While the game on the whole may seem like more of a Castlevania 2 clone, I also noticed a lot more of a Ninja Gaiden or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles feel. You could even argue that there's some aspects of Legend of Zelda 2. Developed by Konami and released in 1987, this is a real shame it never made it to the States, and I'm not sure why, because it doesn't seem overly graphic compared to some of the other titles on this game. The game revolves around Fuma, who must locate 3 pulse blades in order to defeat Ryu Katsuki. The game shifts from an overhead perspective into a side-scroller. Like Castlevania 2, you can enter towns and speak to people, in between cutting down hordes of Japanese legendary creatures. If you make it to the end, there is an interesting, almost 3D view used, and it may not look spectacular, but this has an amazing soundtrack and is really fun to play. I love how many things this game tried, and if you are a fan of any of the games I mentioned, then this really is a must-try. Remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, and the only Ghostbusters games we had on the NES sucked? Yeah, I remember that too. While we would eventually get a good game for the Genesis, Japan had a hidden gem with the new Ghostbusters 2. Developed and published by HAL Laboratories in 1990, this is a faithful adaptation of the second film. You have the ability to control all 4 Ghostbusters, and you can even play as Lewis. And come on, who doesn't love Rick Moranis? Well, except for that one guy that punched him. Anyway, the gameplay is very simple and very arcadey. With an overhead perspective, you lead 2 of your chosen Ghostbusters around various levels. You take control of one of the Ghostbusters, who needs to use their proton pack in order to hold the ghost still, while the other Ghostbuster sets a trap. While this is a very simple mechanic and it might seem like it gets repetitive, the drawback is that it is a one-hit kill game, so you really do need to be smart about how you're going to capture the ghosts. I won't say that the game is perfect, but the graphics, sound, and gameplay are all significantly better than what we got in the US, so if you are a Ghostbusters fan, this is one you really need to try. The final game, and probably to no one's surprise, is Splatterhouse Wenpaku Graffiti. This is an amazing game that is fun, gory, comical, and features some of the best side-scrolling controls for any of these games. As the second game in the Splatterhouse series, this is truly one of a kind. This game may serve as a prequel. I don't want to give any spoilers, but wait till you see the ending of the game and then you can decide. But you will be playing as Rick, and in this one you are no longer only facing deformed creatures, but rather you're going to be going against a lot more of the traditional movie monsters, such as Dracula, the Wolfman, and even the Fly. The ultimate goal is to save Jennifer from the dreaded Pumpkin King. You will be able to use axes and shotguns like in any of the other titles from the series, and even though the graphics are presented in a very goofy way, there are some pretty messed up moments. And in a sea of horror games that took themselves way too serious, this is that perfect campy 80s throwback that I have a ton of love for, and you can see our review in the links below if you want a little more details on that. So it makes sense why it never was released in the US. Even if you think the game is going to be a little too goofy for you, you really need to give this one a try. It's a double must for anyone that is a Splatterhouse fan. Well, with that, it'll do it for this list. Come back next week as we dive into the 16-bit era. Now, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. Cheers, guys.